It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Andrea Leon-Grossman. I'm the Climate Action Director for Azul. And Azul is an organization that works with Latinos in matters of the ocean and coastal conservation issues. We fight for coastal access. We also fight against plastic pollution, against offshore drilling, and again, we just fight for equity in all these issues. We understand that when it comes to the environment, especially coastal issues, organizations are extremely white. So we want to make sure that we bring a voice that represents the Latino community.
I see. That's very interesting. You're marrying social justice and environmental causes into something that's integrative.
That's correct.
I see. And so how long has Azul been an organization?
So we have been present for 9 years. We're growing. The founder, Marce, started this years ago when she knew that we needed a voice in this, environment, because everyone is very white, and Latinos are very, very engaged in this issue in terms of caring for the environment, caring for beaches, and making sure that, we have a voice. And unfortunately, there's not an organization that represents us in this way. So that's why Azul came to be. And and the good thing is that we're growing, and I'm so happy to be part of the team.
I see. And there are very large Latino communities that are in counties that are by the ocean, right? Coastal counties as well as inland, just throughout California. And so one of the places that we want to focus on for the show is what's going on in Orange County itself. And specifically a new project that's being debated right now, whether it should go forward or not, is this Poseidon project for desalinating ocean water. Can you tell us a bit more about how this project came to be and kind of what the pitch is?
So Poseidon Huntington Beach, they started thinking about this project back in the year 2000. So this project is not necessarily new in the sense of what they want to do. It's 20-year-old technology, so it's really old technology. And the reason why they want it here in Huntington Beach in Orange County is not necessarily because it's the best place geographically to put it. It's just, it's the right place politically to put it in. So again, they wanted to put it in. It hasn't panned out because, we have pointed out all the deficiencies and why it's not the best project for Orange County. Especially North Orange County, has a big supply of groundwater that we can, tap into anytime. And while this was going on, they figured, well, let's just go to San Diego and Carlsbad because it's even more conservative. There's going to be less pushback. And they pushed this desalination plant in Carlsbad in the middle of the drought. So they were able to build that one. So now we have that plant to know how bad this corporation is. And we know now that they have been fined many times over because they have dumped more brine into the ocean than they claimed they would dump. We know that this plant has all kinds of problems. In April of this year, they had to shut down for 2 weeks because of red tide. And that resulted in $15 million savings for the water district. So that's how expensive this water is. So we know that Poseidon is not a good corporate partner
to the community.
With the water districts or the community. We know this is the most energy intensive water we can get. This is the most risky water investment we can make. It doesn't even make sense in terms of jobs. We're talking about one job per every $500,000 of investment. We can get many more jobs in conservation, in water recycling. So it doesn't really make sense from any way you look at it. And then from a human right to water perspective, again, you're talking about the most expensive water, and we're in the middle of a recession, almost a depression.
Hmm.
and in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, the last thing you want to do, especially for low-income families, is for them to stop washing their hands, to stop practicing good hygiene,
Right.
um, and for water rates to go up, and for people to end up homeless because of an increase in a water bill. Or, for those renters, water is included in the rent. So if water goes up, the owner of the property has the right to raise the rent. And it's
Hmm.
not just the water that you use in the unit, but the water that is used also for the whole building. So they have, they can raise your rent 50, $100 if water goes up.
Hmm.
So again, it's not fair for anyone who is barely making ends meet, for those essential workers who are keeping us safe.
Hmm.
So it's really a matter of the human right to water.
Hmm. I see. So you mentioned that this plant has opened up in Carlsbad, and that's given us this data that we can kind of reflect on and see what's going to happen. When did that plant open up?
So it opened up in 2015.
Hmm.
It was approved in 2010. That's when they started construction.
Hmm.
And if you look at the data, actually, Consumer Reports, in conjunction with The Guardian, they released a study about 2-3 weeks ago, and it showed that since this plant was built and it went into operation, San Diego water has become very unaffordable, to the point that it's one of the most unaffordable waters in the nation. So that's one of the reasons why we should say no to Poseidon and make sure that this does not happen, because we just cannot afford it. Not
Hmm.
only that, but we know that this water is not needed. So why should we build something that is give us more of something that we cannot afford?
Hmm. Right, right. What are the interests that are pushing the Poseidon project? There's the
So
company itself, I imagine, but are
that's
there
correct.
other people invested in making sure
Absolutely.
this goes?
It's first of all, Brookfield. It's a Canadian company, so we're talking about a foreign company that is the parent company of Poseidon. And they have all kinds of interests. They have a lot of real estate property here, and other infrastructure that basically benefits from all these water and investments. Poseidon actually is in the top projects for Trump. He supports this project to the point that he um, wants to subsidize it to the tune of $585 million.
Mm,
They allocated a WIFIA loan, EPA loan, that is forgivable. So basically that's what they're counting on, free money, public
mm,
money for private profit. And so there's all these corporations that are benefiting from
mhm,
this type of boondoggle. And not only that, but through the years, they keep hiring all these public affairs firms, all these lobbyists.
mhm,
And one of our points during last week's meeting was, if this was such a good project, why do they have to hire all these guns,
mhm,
hire
mhm.
guns, to basically try to convince us all that this is a good project?
Right.
Uh, on- and it's a matter of equity as well, because low-income families cannot even hire one
Mhm,
lobbyists to speak for them, let alone five different public affair firms.
mhm,
And it's very interesting because a lot of those firms are also hired by fossil fuel industry. And again, this
mhm,
plant is going to run on dirty gas by the AES plant, because it needs to be co-located next to it.
mm,
It, it uses the same amount of energy as 35,000 homes day in and day out.
mhm.
So it really needs to be, you know, right next to one of these plants.
I see.
And it will lock us into that dirty energy for the long term.
Mhm,
So they have gone back and forth in terms of how many years the contract will be. First
mhm,
they said 50 years, then they went down to 30 years because of sea level rise. Now the regional water board wants to go back to 50 years. And the way the contract works is take or pay. So if we sign
mm.
on the dotted line, we have to pay for that water whether we need it or not. So even
I
if we
see.
have a very wet year and we don't need
Mhm,
the water, we still have to pay for that water.
mm,
Now it's sea level rise is real, and
mhm,
it's going to happen. And it's very likely this plant will be underwater by the time the lease is or the contract is over.
mm.
So
Because it needs to be physically located right by the ocean as well.
exactly, because that's where the
Mhm,
intakes are.
mhm.
So and by the end of the term, they want to give it to us, the taxpayer, so that we have to decommission it.
Mm, I
So it's just
see.
one of those things that it just costs you so much to begin with because they want to build it with public money. Then they want to make us pay for the super expensive water. And at the end of it, they want us, the taxpayers, to decommission it. So it's a horrible, expensive way to source water, no matter how you look at it. It's all for private gain, for Wall Street people.
Yeah. So what stage is the water board at in terms of considering this project, and what is the take that Azul has as to, you know, what's being proposed here? Is the idea that, you know, we are good with the resources that we have currently? Is it that we do need to think about our water sources, but there are better alternatives? Or is there a thought that these certain aspects of this contract that seem really unfair to the community for all the reasons that you've laid out need to be reworked significantly in order for this to kind of go forward, and then it would be a possible thing to consider?
So our position is that we should never say no to desalination. It should always be the last resort. And we've seen it, for instance, in Israel, where they really exhausted everything until they figured that's the only way we can get water. And the fact is that we're not there yet. I mean, especially if you look at conservation, Israel is their consumption per capita is about 50 gallons per person, and in Orange County it's about 3 times that. So,
oh wow.
and that's for the average person. But if you look at the people who are struggling right now, low-income folks, they have really cut to the bone. They have nowhere else to cut back. They are reusing their water in many ways that you can even think of. So we really need to make sure that those who are struggling don't get hit with another increase. A lot of these folks, the proponents, are like, well, it might just be like $6 or $10 more a month, or as they put it, a Starbucks coffee. And that really shows their privilege, because a lot of these people have never been at a Starbucks. And that's just, again, to me, is even offensive. So our position is that we really need to exhaust those resources. And I don't think there's a reason to pit people against people. We can really have it all. We can have good jobs that are union jobs, inefficiency, and that are a lot easier on the environment and a lot easier on the pocketbooks of families who are right now struggling. And right now where we are is that we have public comment last week on Thursday and Friday, and then they started deliberating whether to give Poseidon the discharge permit that they want before they go to the Coastal Commission, which is the final step. They did not finish the deliberations. They will finish that on Friday, next Friday. So this Friday, which is the
August 7th.
August 7th. And they have to do that live, so they cannot deliberate behind closed doors. And that's going to be for everyone to see. There's quite a few issues going on right now. The representative for Poseidon was giving the access to basically deliberate with the board, which we think is illegal, because I mean, if he's there, then why are we not part of that? Right. There's also a part of like the mitigation. They realize that this is a project that is going to damage marine life. So they're saying, well, if we realize that, so we're going to help with Bolsa Chica and the restoration for that wetland. And there's even kind of discrepancy between what they think should be done and what we think should be done, and how much credit they should be getting for that. And then there's also another factor in terms of mitigation for the actual emissions that they have. And what they want to do is just buy offsets out of the state and even out of the country.
Carbon offsets.
Correct. And even those carbon offsets, what we in the environmental justice community call them is pay to poison or pay to pollute, because you're just paying a small fee to pollute at the source. So people who live in Orange County will get basically burdened with the emissions. So for someone who's getting cancer or asthma or something, they don't really care if you're paying, somewhere else to buy a forest like Ecuador, because Poseidon is actually buying some forests in Ecuador to offset this thing. And some of the energy they're actually buying out of state is in biomass or biogas. And biomass, we know that is basically incinerating wood chips. which is actually also contributing to climate change.
Hmm.
So a lot of the stuff that is here in their climate plan or offsets is not even really offsetting what they're doing. It's actually contributing even more to climate change and also harming communities in other states. So I think what they're really proposing is poisoning even more people, to poison people here in Southern California.
So it's just a bad deal for everyone.
It's a horrendous deal. The only ones who will win are basically them who are polluting, and then the people making the trades, the carbon trades with the banks, and then people in Wall Street who are buying, this type of thing. Everyone else loses. So it's really not the right thing to do. And again, I mean, if you look at the amount of jobs that it will generate, it's just short term, maybe 2 years while they build this plant, and then they'll go away. A lot of these are very specialized, and the engineering firms that are in charge bring their own people. So
not local jobs.
No, I mean there might be some, but not as many as they claim, and they're all temporary. I mean, right now for Carlsbad, they claim that they had 10 or 12 people sequestered while this pandemic is going, and I mean, seriously, because everything is really highly automated. So,
I see.
To have 12 permanent jobs after this is done, I don't think it's an investment worth doing, especially when we're using public funds to do, this type of boondoggle.
I see. So given the experience you and Azul has in, advocating for or against such policies, where do you think the board stands? Is it impossible to tell right now? How do you think
it is hard to tell? I mean, we were part of our presentation was, basically saying we don't have the same lobbies that Poseidon has, and what we have is you, and that's true. I mean, we tried to make the best case that we had before them, saying there's many people who would love to be here and tell you we cannot afford higher water bills, and especially not now, not in the long term, not for 30 or 50 years. And we don't know where they are. I mean, we have been encouraged for some of the questioning that they had of this plant in the impact it will have in low-income families, the impact it will have in the environment, and its further industrialization of the coast that we don't need. At the same time, today, there was a report on the Voice of OC that brought up a huge conflict of interest of one of the board of directors who has gotten money from Poseidon directly for her campaign as a council member. And she has kept refusing to recuse herself. So that's a huge issue that we have. I think it's unlikely that she will recuse herself for the final vote, even though I think she should. And it's clear, I mean, if you look at the hearings that we had in May and now last week, if you hear the way she expresses herself, it's clearly that she's biased towards Poseidon. So
who are the people of the water board? Are they people who are scientists, engineers, have something to do with water related management? Like, who are the people who are part of this?
They are all appointed officials. So some of the people who are in this board were appointed either by Jerry Brown or Governor Newsom. So those are the people who are there. So they're members of the particular community where they serve, but they don't necessarily have experience in the board that they serve. We are lucky to have a couple of, I think one engineer, and I think some of them are attorneys, so they can see some of the legal part of it, or the, engineering in terms of contracts and how they, like right now, one of the board members has been questioning, is like, why there's no water takers. Like right now, there's no takers for the water that Poseidon is trying to sell in terms of water districts. OC Water District does, they say, well, we do want this water, but they haven't committed with a binding contract. And every time they get asked on that, they buckle and they're like, well, and they give some kind of weird answer, but they never get to like why they haven't signed on the dotted line. And it's clear they have been always with Poseidon. And there's a few months ago where I was in one of my first meetings, and they were there. And in the end, they had the rep from Poseidon try to answer the questions. So that was like, again, one of those eye-opening moments when you see like how the dynamics are working or not working. So there's like, yeah, we want the water. And they're like, okay, so how much is it going to cost? And it's like, we don't know. It's like, why haven't you signed on the dotted line? It's like, well, we don't know. It's like, so, and they're like, okay, so what if there's no takers? Like, oh, we'll just dump it into the groundwater. And there's issues with that as well, because if you dump into the groundwater, this water that comes out from the ocean and gets filtered through reverse osmosis, is similar to distilled water, but it has boron, which is a chemical that affects reproductive systems in human beings. So it's not really good quality water to begin with. So it needs to be mixed with other water to
be drinkable and usable.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a very nuanced issue. It also cannot be put right into the pipes because it's similar to distilled water. So it starts stripping minerals from the pipes. So it starts corroding the pipes. And it cannot be used in crops either. In Israel, the first time they used desalinated water in crops, it actually killed a citrus orchard. Because
it just doesn't have the right electrolytes?
No, it doesn't have the right combination of minerals, and it has boron also is not good for crops.
Wow, I see.
So there's a lot of issues with this water. It's not your regular drinking groundwater water.
Right.
There's another issue that we have in terms of equity, and it's really coming to the forefront now, is PFAS contamination.
What is that?
PFAS is they call it forever chemicals. So it's a lot of the stuff they use every day. Teflon and anything that is water resistant. Anything that is also flammable, like anything that will retard flames. So anything that is nearby an airport or firefighters, anything, if any foam, that type of a thing. And unfortunately, it's making it into our groundwater system. Orange County is one of the counties that has a huge problem in terms of PFAS contamination. And we don't have enough money to do both Poseidon and decontaminate the PFAS. Now, PFAS, just put into context, are way more toxic than lead. So it's a big issue that we need to address sooner than later.
Right.
Especially because they bioaccumulate. So what do we do? I mean, the right thing to do is to address this issue because it's going to affect everyone.
Is it a quick issue to address if somebody goes to tackle it? Like how many years would it take to decontaminate? I mean, the thing
is that it's kind of two-pronged. One is we need to test and remediate, and then we also need to ban further PFAS from entering the system. So that's one issue. If we build Poseidon, that's going to stifle the money, whatever money was going to go for that contamination to build this thing that we don't need.
I see.
And wealthier people can just put a whole house filter and be done with it and eliminate the PFAS, because those systems can eliminate PFAS. But people who live in low-income communities, and especially renters, won't be able to afford one of those systems, and their bodies are going to start getting poisoned by these PFAS. And they're going to get all kinds of cancers and other health issues. And that's an equity issue as well. So that's why we really need to make sure that the board understands that, first of all, this water is not needed, that we only have so many limited resources, and we need to use them wisely.
That's a very strong point. Did you feel like at the public comment periods of last Thursday and Friday, your organization Azul got a good chance to make these points? And do other people in the public who may want to chime in, do they have an opportunity this Friday, or is that going to be just the board speaking?
It's just going to be the board, but it's going to be very important for people to listen in, because they keep tabs on how many people are listening in. So if they see that hardly anyone is tuning in, it's going to be a lot easier for them to do whatever they want. So I think it's really important for people to be on the lookout. And this is going to be something that is going to affect everyone. Now, Poseidon is not done yet. I mean, if they get this approved, they want to build more along the coast. And this is, again, something that is detrimental for the human right to water.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, again, more of these projects are going to hurt us as ratepayers, us as taxpayers, and the ocean, right when we need to protect the ocean more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
This type of plants, especially at the intake, they suck on all this marine life, especially phytoplankton and all the smaller fish that larger fish are dependent on, and the plankton that basically give us a lot of oxygen. Acidification is a real issue as well. So we really need to be sure that we don't just build these just to make sure that Wall Street investors, can profit off the ocean. I mean, really, what we're doing right now, what Poseidon is trying to do, is to profit off of not only potable water, but also salt water. And that's just an atrocity. Again, we don't need this right now. We have water. And I mean, right now, for instance, the Carlsbad plant is selling their water at $2,800 an acre foot. The most expensive water after that is the water that we import from the Delta at $1,100 an acre foot.
Wow. So it is more expensive than water that's coming and being transported. I see.
It's more energy intensive as well.
Wow. Okay.
Now, in terms of energy, another thing to point out is that, I mean, you and I will hear all these ads on the radio or on TV. It's time for a flex alert. Please shut off your electricity or something. And eventually they might even do a brownout or a blackout because we just don't have enough electricity to go by because we have a heat wave. When that happens, they might even shut off power for, a lot of people. Poseidon is going to have to keep working, and they will get priority in terms of power. And that's also an equity issue, because we know that a lot of people are now on home dialysis systems and on a lot of life-saving or life-sustaining devices. And those are going to get cut so that Poseidon can keep profiting from selling water.
I see. Does Poseidon get priority because they can't just shut the plant down? Is that what it is?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. I see.
And because they're selling water, so they're like, now it's like...
It's an essential item.
Right.
I see. So it really closes the gate on any other sources of water that may be possibly feasible, for example, decontaminating the ground water and things like that, while perhaps producing more than is necessary.
It for sure will produce more than is necessary. I mean,
needed.
Especially in North Orange County, they have more than enough groundwater. This is not the plant that is needed there at all.
So I'd like to spend a little bit of time. So today I drove from the Bay Area down to here. And, as you go along the way, there's a lot of signs in the Central Valley where people are saying, is growing food wasting water and things like that, right? So this has been a contentious issue in California for some time. And I think it's because we've faced this scarcity about water previously. So can you give me some context about the broader discussion that's happening about access to water, and maybe some of the players, and kind of what your take is, what Azul's take is on this?
Absolutely. And just to give you a little bit more background, before I joined Azul, I used to work for Food and Water Watch, where I also worked on some water campaigns. And one of the campaigns where I worked was also in terms of like all the water issues in the Central Valley. A lot of them had to do with all the almonds that are being planted in the desert and other nuts, where we have no business planting those type of crops in the desert. They need an extraordinary amount of water to grow, and they need to be flooded. And now they're getting all this water, and they want to get even more water with all kinds of infrastructure projects. So when they say food, one needs to be asked what kind of food. Now, most of the almonds in the world are provided by California. So we need to be exporting essentially our water to the world when we,
are in the middle of a drought.
Exactly. So do we need to be spending all this energy transporting water to the desert? And it's not only about the climate in the desert, or the weather that is extremely hot, but it's also the soil. We're talking a lot of different chemicals that the soil is just not the best to grow those type of crops. So that's also why a lot more water is needed to grow those crops. And eventually it's just not going to be apt to grow any crops whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need to prioritize where we're really using our water to grow what we eat and the type of crops that we're subsidizing. We should not be subsidizing almonds in the desert, that's for sure. And we should not be subsidizing Wall Street business to ship almonds around the world. I mean, the carbon footprint of that alone is just instrumental, and that we can't be doing that. So I think that's a key component. And we know that, for instance, the Wonderful Company, which is Palm Wonderful and Wonderful Almonds and Pistachios, they're one of the key players in the Central Valley, and they want to, you know, they donate handsomely to campaigns, political campaigns, and that's why they get the water that they get to grow all these crops that they shouldn't be growing. And they also have Fiji water, which is also more plastic pollution. So again, it's very interesting, like how corruption works and how we really need to be rethinking how we value water and how, you know, we use our water. The owners of that company, I think they use the same amount of water as LA, like twice over or something ridiculous. So we really, again, need to evaluate how we use our water. I mean, if it was really food that you and I eat, you know,
right, that's one thing you're saying.
Exports, exactly.
So how does, I mean, it seems like so many of these interests are entrenched in, you know, how they've been conducting life so far, right? Or, you know, they've used a certain amount and they want to keep going with it. Maybe they even want to expand. And then you come to face a moment of scarcity, and you really need to have discussions about what is worth keeping, what is not. Who do you think is the appropriate person to make such decisions? Do you think it should be like democratically decided in some sort of way, or does this model of different advocacy groups like going and petitioning work well? What has been kind of effective, you think?
Well, I mean, for certain, we need leadership in Sacramento who can really look at where we're spending our resources. And I mean, moving water also uses a lot of energy. Uses about 20% of all the electricity, moving water from north to south, and about
20% of California's energy.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
And about 30% of all the gas to move. So that's humongous. So if we were to really spend our money wisely and resources wisely to have more local water, and that doesn't mean desalination, that means recycling water, and that means gray water systems, and that means efficiency, and that means also a lot of good green jobs for people to be had in this economy. That also means good for your wallet and for low-income families. So I'm sorry. So, you know, that I think we really need to go back to those basics and make sure that money is not buying politicians and influence. Again, low-income families cannot even afford one lobbyist.
Right.
And I think we really need to be looking for helping, especially now in this huge economic crisis, those who can least afford it.
That's very true. So we need to basically have people who aren't kind of bought out, for lack of a better word, I guess. Yeah. Right. There seems to be this other element about this, which I see common between what you mentioned about the almond growers who are planting almonds in the desert and and Poseidon, who's doing desalination, which is, I suppose, some sort of feat of technology that was, you know, we managed to do at some point, right? Which is kind of like, it's a scientific advance. It's our ability to do something coming into conflict with whether or not we should do it. Right. And so do you think at the inception of this, we need to take some of the social matters into account in order to figure out what kinds of things we should invent and what problems that we should try to tackle? Or like, is there some kind of a source?
I think that social justice and environmental justice should always come first. I mean, and right now it's not necessarily the way it's happening. Low-income people have always had it the worst in terms of, you know, the way things have been run. And we're trying to change that. We see people on the streets saying, enough is enough. And this is also another issue of environmental racism, how the emissions are going to go and how water rates are going to go and who are they going to, who's going to be impacted the most by this project. And I think that's a key thing. We Azul is very pleased that the Coastal Commission adopted an environmental justice policy last year, in which basically every project and every policy has to be viewed through those lens.
I see.
So I think that's a crucial moment in time that we really need to applaud. And I think that's something that every entity in government needs to adopt. Because again, who's going to advocate for those with the least means? People who are wealthy have, again, the power to hire, lobbyists and public affair firms to make sure that they get their
voices heard.
Exactly, and their interests taken care of. Those with the least means don't. So how do we balance that? Right now it's not being very
equitable.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it really fleshes out this idea of having that lens, right? It means evaluate the policies or the solutions put forward by that means as well when you're doing your holistic analysis of
correct
what
and,
is
and
doable.
Even some of the same farm workers who are working the Central Valley, I mean, there's plenty of water for those crops that are very water intensive, and those farm workers don't have access to water themselves. Water, in some of the water that they may have access to, is contaminated. So they in turn have to go and buy bottled water to have something to
clean.
And it's to me, that's just is sinful and immoral. So we really need to, I think we evaluate how we're using our water and the way water rights were allocated in the state. Because again, it's not working. It's similar to the Electoral College in the nation. Who thought of this way of doing politics and choosing our elected officials and our president? It's the same thing with water rights. How did we arrive to this point, and who's benefiting, and who's making the decisions?
Is Azul trying to work at the local level in different places, as we see with you guys tackling Poseidon, or is there also an approach at the state level? And if so, kind of what are the initiatives that Azul is trying to advance?
So we mostly work at the state level and sometimes even at the national level. In this case, we're working locally because we see this as something that is precedent setting, that we can see them expanding. So right now, for instance, West Basin, which is a water agency in West LA, they're looking into desalination, and they just don't have the means or the way to build one. And we can see Poseidon allying with them to build one. Of course, with public money for private, profit. So again, it's like a bigger picture than, and see how we can help our community ensure that they have equitable access to the coast and water, and protect the rights of the most and those who are being affected the most by these type of corporations.
Right. I see. So you see this as a very crystallizing moment, something that can impact other projects to come.
That's correct.
And you mentioned that most of the work is on the state and national level. Could you speak a little bit about what goes on at those levels?
So yeah, we have like a big campaign against plastic pollution, because we see plastics, it's not only about them ending in the ocean, which they do, and we know this plastic pollution in the ocean is a big deal, but it's the whole circle of death from extraction, because that's also where environmental communities live, especially for instance, in Southern California, in Los Angeles is the biggest urban oil field in the nation. And if you look at who lives next to the extraction, that's mostly low-income communities of color. And then refineries is the same thing.
Mhm.
And then who lives next to the stores where most of this disposable stuff lives, and who is targeted by most disposable stuff, and it's the same thing.
Low income.
Exactly. And then after that, what happens to all this stuff? It ends up either in an incinerator,
Mhm.
which, and who lives next to incinerators is the same thing, or a landfill.
Mhm.
And then and all that contributes also to climate change. And who gets the most affected by climate change is also low income communities of color.
Right.
And whatever was an incinerator or end up in the landfill ends up in the ocean.
Mhm. Mhm.
And many people, and we see it also here in Huntington Beach, where they want to build this desal plant, go and fish for their own sustenance.
Mhm.
And we can see people getting affected by the fish they won't be able to eat, or in the case of plastics, fish with
That are
plastics in their
killed. Yeah.
systems. So
Mhm.
so we see this as an equity issue,
Mhm.
and an environmental racism in every way,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
the plastic industry. So yeah, and recycling, we're not going to recycle ourselves out of this problem.
Mhm.
So again, it's just one of those issues where we see a way that we can make a difference and ally with other partners.
Mhm.
Same thing with offshore drilling, and the pipes, in where all that happens is low-income communities of color, where
Right.
a lot of that ends up taking place. And fighting, of course, industrialization of the coast. So if you see a lot of
Mhm.
the beaches where there have been industrialized, that's where a lot of our community ends up going to the beach and not being harassed.
Mm.
So yeah, we actually end up developing a little card that is in Spanish, and the title is Know Your Rights, because a lot
Mhm.
of people end up being harassed in California, and California actually, no beach is private,
Oh, I see.
except for marine bases. But um, a lot of people are told this is private beach, get out, and a lot of people do get out, even though it's not. So
Huh.
so
You see
we do
that
have,
around Orange County itself, I think. You get the sense that some areas are private property
right.
or restricted.
And it happens like in Malibu and other places.
Mhm.
So and there's all kinds of trickery that they use, like painting like the curb red, or
Mhm.
putting planters, or all kinds of things, also so people won't park there or won't
Mhm.
access the beach.
Mhm.
So again, we're trying to make sure that people understand the rights, and
Mhm.
California beaches are for everyone,
Mhm.
and just make sure that everyone's informed.
Mhm.
The card that we have also has a call out in English, so that if they get
Mhm.
harassed, they can show whomever that
Mhm.
call out box, saying this is a private public beach, and
Yeah.
per the Coastal Act, and they also have a phone number to call.
Mhm. That's wonderful. I have a question that's going to be naive, but I figure you may have some perspective on it, because Azul is kind of marrying these two initiatives that I think often have been tackled separately. I was seeing like a year ago some articles that talked about this very specific issue, but it brought up a bigger point. Air conditioning units in countries that are developing more industry and infrastructure, and how more and more people are able to afford such units, and how they're very useful, especially as temperatures in a lot of places are warming up. But there is an environmental impact that happens as more and more people kind of use it. So there's discussion of like, should we invest a lot in trying to figure out like alternative means of cooling houses down and whatnot. And there's basically this kind of pitting of like the environmental issues versus equity issues. Do you think that happens rarely in reality? Do you find that there are things to navigate in terms of kind of how we move forward with that? Or what is this at all an issue that you're familiar with, or is it kind of unusual and isn't something that happens too often?
Well, I mean, Azul doesn't really work on those issues. I
Right.
know in terms of efficiency, not only in terms of water, but also in terms of electricity, and in terms of just how, especially new housing is built, it could be a lot cooler or a lot warmer in the winter, and also in terms of electrification. Um, that goes also in terms of gas stoves, for instance, how they could be a lot, like indoor air could be a lot more toxic than outside air if you use a gas stove. And it can actually, in the summer, it can heat your whole house if you're using a gas stove. So like newer technology like induction stoves are not only safer because of the way they work, but also they're a lot more efficient. And they only, for instance, they only heat up your pan or your pot, and they work a lot faster than a gas stove, and they don't poison your whole family. So I think it's just like how are we going to move forward, and how are we going to get corporations influence the system? SoCalGas, just like Poseidon, have their own front groups that are trying to make sure that they get their way, and it's just how we're going to allow them to do their trickery. I know SoCalGas, for instance, has been using their some of the money from ratepayers to advocate against electrification, which is illegal. And Poseidon came up with their own group, OCYs, which is mostly businesses advocating for Poseidon, and they claim they have EJ groups, and I don't know any of them. So it's really interesting. One of the advocates for Poseidon is LULAC, which is a Latino group. But in the past, LULAC has been allying with like the Western State Petroleum Association.
I see.
And the president of LULAC at one point even wrote a letter for Trump, basically commending him on his immigration policies. So, I mean, that's something that we would never do, or, you know, at other EJ organizations we work with. So
so there needs to be some level of trust in these organizations.
Correct. So other EJ orgs that have signed on to a letter that we sent to Sacramento and other Democrats who are, you know, deciding on these issues have basically said, you know, we don't need these. This is something that is going to poison our community, not only in terms of the ocean, but of the emissions because of the power plant. And these offsets are just horrible. So all these EJ orgs are grassroots organizations, and they have never sided with Trump on immigration or anything like that. So, or taken, you know, money from oil companies or big oil or associations related to WESPA or anything. So yeah.
I see. Well, it's been very illuminating. Thank you so much for coming and speaking about this issue. I think it's probably not, I'm not sure how much in Huntington Beach people know about this, perhaps more so than in other communities, but clearly the reach of it would be throughout the Orange County. And it sounds like because it could influence the development of other plants, it really even goes beyond that. And so I appreciate you coming on and chatting about it.
No, it's my pleasure. And yeah, I mean, the whole Orange County is going to be affected because it's all the water agencies throughout Orange County that will have to raise rates for everyone.
Right. Well, thank you so much for speaking about this and keeping us informed.
No, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.